I don't care.
Okay.
Go for
Hardware.
it.
Hardware. Software. Memory. Software runs on the hardware. It is somewhat determined by the kind of hardware that it's running on. Hardware is inactive, lifeless, without the software. And memory is part of both. Bits of information stored as binary states, on or off. But is the information the memory, or is the electric charge or absence thereof the memory? This episode continues the themes that we have dominated the series so far. Asking the question, what is a human? By contrasting us with machines. This episode focuses on the idea of memory. What is a memory? Is the soul, if humans have a soul, different from just memories? How we remember things and how we are remembered by others. Are we time machines, able to transport ourselves back in time through our memories? Are video records, documents, and even artifacts like a severed hand, pieces of the past, like dents left on a hospital wall? Evidence that we were here. Marks that we make on the world. And what if those records are incomplete? Information and context are missing. Can two people remember the same event very differently? What if our memory gets corrupted, twisted by our own desires and emotions? Do we become different people if the memories change? We'll be wrestling with these questions on this episode. I'm Calvin.
And I'm Ian.
Come with us if you want to live.
Well, Calvin, I hope you had a good holiday, and our listeners had a good holiday too.
I definitely had a break from doing this podcast.
We definitely did do that.
That's all I'll say. Yeah, so this episode, Ian, you said this episode is fantastic. This episode is great. What's so fab about it?
I think that just all the pieces kind of work together. You've got really sharp direction and lighting, so it looks really great. Like, I think it actually looks better than a lot of the other episodes. It's directed by Charles Beeson, who has directed lots of other TV shows as well. Like most directors on TV, he goes from show to show. It's written by Tony Graffia. I think that the dialogue and the characters and all those interactions that are constructed by the writing are really well done. Conceptually, of course, you have the writers and producers integrating Summer Glau's ballet background into the story with her subplot. You have a lot of unexpected choices that make it stand out in the memory. So I just think that it really stands out in ways that are emotionally effective and intellectually interesting.
Yeah, it's a very tightly plotted episode. You know, I was listening to a review of a different TV show the other day, and they were talking about how baggy and unstructured the plot of the episode seemed to be. This is not that. This has sort of two plots that follow two investigations with plenty of sleuthing. So Sarah has a mission to track down the severed Terminator hand and
From the T-888 from
finds Ellison. Yeah, finds Ellison in the process. And then Cameron has the mission of tracking down Dimitri and the Turk. And so they're running parallel tracks with their sleuthing, come to similar conclusions, but make different choices, as you said.
Yes, which of course is the point.
If
And
you can even call what Cameron does a choice, because of course, from a certain perspective, it's not a choice. It's just what she was programmed to do.
yeah, I mean, there's two really there's two things they want us to look at. One is that, um, and I apologize, we're going to kind of jump around the episode a bit here, but this strain of analyzing the episode, I think, is really fruitful. We've talked a lot about how Sarah, particularly, and John later, but Sarah right now, often is shown to be more mechanical, more emotionless and logical and ruthless. But here, even though she is still hard and accomplishes her mission, she shows that she has a genuine desire to help others and save life and value life. While Cameron, of course, um, does not care about life unless it is in her value hierarchy. There's two types of people in the world. Well, no, there's three types of people in the world: targets, defendees, and meat.
Objects that are either in her way or not in her way.
Yeah. But on the other hand, the episode does want us to think about Cameron as potentially possessed of something like a soul, something nascent in her appreciation of ballet and her imitation. Of course, skeptics would argue it is simply imitation, but um, and this is perhaps just an artifact of the fact that Cameron is played by a human, played by a woman, Summer Glau, who was a professional ballerina before she injured herself. Um, the way they film her ballet recital and Derek watching, I think, is intended to make us ask. I don't think it's intended to be like, oh, she's just imitating. I think we are supposed to think there may be more to a Terminator who is allowed to learn and immerse in human society than simple programming.
Yeah, I mean that's why I raised the question of memory and the way our minds can play tricks on us when we're remembering things. So, in some sense, Cameron is an artifact from Derek's past, which is in our perspective's future. And we explored some of Derek's memories in the last episode. Do you think that Cameron or a Terminator model like Cameron was what he saw in the other room?
Are you asking me to attempt to simulate like I haven't seen
Musical
season
choice,
two?
musical choice for Cameron's ballet suggests that that is a possibility.
Are you asking me to act like I haven't watched season two in my answer, or do you want me to answer with the totality of my knowledge?
Well, so you're saying Cameron's dance at the end of the episode proves that Cameron is acquiring human-like traits.
Yes.
And what I'm saying is that this episode is playing with the idea of memory. And that our perspective as an audience on the meaning of Cameron's dance at the end may be different from Derek's perspective on the meaning of Cameron's dance at the end. And I think, yes, that's developed more in season 2, but I think it's strongly hinted at in this episode.
I think it's interesting that I'm leaning harder on ambiguity, and you are more interested in what the hard facts of the situation in the final scene are.
Well, okay, let's back up and approach this from a different angle. Throughout this episode, us as audience members are asked to recollect the events of the opening scenes of Terminator 2 Judgment Day, which there may be people who watch this television show who had never seen Terminator 2, but I imagine most of the people who have watched this television show have already seen Terminator 2 or have gone out to see Terminator 2 as a result of watching the show. And we're being asked as audience members to recall the events of the opening scenes of Terminator 2 in a different way and from different perspectives than the perspective that's given us in the original film.
Yeah.
And so this episode is asking us to wrestle with what it means for a memory to be changed or recontextualized. And you kind of have that same thing. This is kind of it's not even a B plot, it's the C plot, but you have the conflict between John and Sarah in this episode, in which John thinks that he has all the facts because he's watched a videotape. But he does, in fact, not have all the facts because that videotape that he watched is an incomplete artifact of the events of the past.
Yeah. I think all these layers and iterational writing, iterational creation of the episode are part of why I think it's so intellectually and emotionally interesting, because it's playing with Terminator 2 on so many levels, not just the opening scenes, but all throughout, with the highway cop disguise that Cameron dons, and the scenes with Silberman and Silberman himself, and the retellings from Silberman's perspective of what happened with overlaid theological implications. There's just a lot of added value in this episode that I think make you think in an enjoyable way.
Yeah, so let's talk about Silberman for a moment. We can again briefly mention, again from non-diegetic perspective, we are literally being asked to remember Silberman differently because a different actor is playing that character. And not just a different actor, but an actor who physically looks very different from the original actor.
Yes. And it has a very different voice as well.
Yes. And this Silberman is very different from the Silberman that is presented to us in the first two films. Somewhat different from the brief appearance that he has in Terminator 3. Although arguably they're both being motivated by extreme fear.
Yep.
In this version of Silberman, that extreme fear has transformed itself into paranoid delusion and madness
And violence.
with and violence, with, of course, the proverbial proviso that just because you're paranoid does not mean that nobody is out to kill you.
In the Terminator universe, they are out to kill you.
Yes, they are here. They are coming.
Individually or in a nuclear bomb.
Yes. So his memories of the past are yet distorted by this paranoia and madness.
And a strange theological underpinning, which creates another layer in what is the FBI agent's name again?
James Ellison.
Yeah, it adds another layer to Ellison. I think we may have seen hints of it, but this is one of the first times that it's made very explicit that James Ellison is a man who has a distinct Christian faith. And I think that is
so. Yeah, so in the scene, Silverman asks Ellison whether he is a man of the book, because Ellison quotes a verse from the Bible. And Ellison says, "I have found comfort in it from time to time." Sarah, when she breaks into Ellison's house, discovers that it not only has he found comfort in the Bible from time to time, he appears to be a regular Bible reader. And then we see him in a Bible study at the end of the episode in the closing montage. We're not given a lot more information than that, but you're correct that we do. Ellison is presented as someone with a normal, commonplace Christian faith that belongs to the mundane world. We've often contrasted the mundane world with the world as those in the know perceive it within this show and the Terminator franchise as a whole. Silverman initially presents himself as being someone who is in the know. You know, he has apparently taken his experiences from the beginning of T2 and decided to go off the grid and be a farmer out in the woods somewhere. Not unlike John at the beginning of Terminator 3. Living off the grid so as to avoid interaction with machines. But then we discover that he is, in fact, not merely in the know in the same way that Sarah and John and Derek are, but that he has become insane. And twisted, as you said, twisted his experiences into a bizarre millenarian religion that seems to combine biblical prophecy and his own distorted understandings of what Sarah was trying to tell him while she was in the psychiatric hospital.
And I think it's interesting that Cameron in Terminator 2 does make Sarah sound like she's a member of a doomsday cult. I think there are ways that, well, and he did the same with Kyle Reese in Terminator 1. Both of them sound like they're members of doomsday cults screaming about how everyone's dead and it's coming. And I feel like they're attempting to show the traumatic effect of witnessing and experiencing what Kyle and Sarah have experienced, but you don't have to describe the events of Judgment Day in that kind of millenarian doomsday cult way, even though Judgment Day, of course, is also playing with that theological overlay.
Yeah, so it seems like there's a confusion in Silberman's theology, if you want to dignify it with that term. Sarah is somehow a prophet, but then the machines themselves are terrifying, but also beautiful and possibly gods.
I thought Silberman mentioned them as angels more. Angels and
Well, he
demons.
makes a comparison between his rescue by the T-800, which is not a scene that occurs in the original film, although apparently one was written in which the T-1000 kills him.
Which Terminator 3 promptly ignored.
Yeah. And he compares being rescued by the T-800 to the hand of God reaching towards Adam in the Sistine Chapel painting of creation by Michelangelo.
Yeah. There's a lot of references and imagery and madness going on in this description. So it's a bit hard to necessarily assign a strict one-to-one correspondence between a statement and a theological proposition. But I see what you're saying. The comparison of the T800 to God in Sistine Chapel is significant.
And again, not to spoil season 2, but the question of whether Skynet is God or is a god is something that season 2 will ask again.
There's you pointing that out makes me think of all the interesting parallels between Skynet and John himself that I hadn't thought of before. So that'll be very rich for future discussion.
Well, and we even get a reference to the non-diegetic comparison between the Terminator mythos and Christianity, because of course John Connor has the same initials as Jesus Christ, but when Ellison, in an attempt to save his own life, exclaims that Sarah is dead, Silberman says, "So was Jesus." Which does not make a lot of sense logically. But again, I don't think that Silverman's delusions make a lot of sense.
No, I think I don't know how much the writers intend us to think that this is typical. I think given their more sensitive treatment of Ellison's faith, I think they're a bit more sensitive than perhaps many Hollywood writers are to genuine faith and theology. But Silberman certainly is the television caricature of a loony death cultist fundamentalist Christian.
Well, I don't associate his beliefs with Christianity at all. If you look at American history, there's plenty of other millenarian death cults. Apparently the number one show on Netflix right now is American Primeval. So, yeah, we have lots of millenarian death cults to choose from, other than Christianity. All right. Do you want to discuss the moral dichotomy that's presented at the end of the episode between Sarah and Cameron?
Yeah, I think that the choice to have Cameron simply abandon the ballerina and the ballerina's brother because her mission is fulfilled is at once completely logical, but also I think it reflects the darker and more horror inflected nature of the Terminator franchise. Because I think because Cameron's played by Summer Glau and she's a beautiful and appealing and funny and intelligent character, most television viewers think that she's going to do the right thing and save people. But the writers of Terminator are allowed to let Cameron be darker and more consistent with the character they've created. Um, and I think that it's nice that they do so in contrast to Sarah saving Allison.
Yeah, well, so Cameron gets bookend scenes in this episode. So the opening scene of the episode is her on a policeman's motorbike, dressed in a cop uniform that is clearly meant to be represented uh, reminiscent of Robert Patrick's T-1000 in T2. She proceeds to destroy Los Angeles' power grid, which is a pretty astonishing act of terrorism, for the sole purpose of breaking into a police station similar to the Terminator in the first film and stealing the hand as evidence. Unfortunately, the hand is not there. So, yeah, Cameron is presented throughout this episode as being a somewhat sinister character.
Yep, explicitly taking the visual space of the villain of Terminator 2.
Which again goes back to the question that you asked at the beginning, which is this episode attempting to humanize Cameron? And I'm a little bit more skeptical about that than you are.
Well, I don't think that the answer is a simple yes, because obviously she's intended to be seen as much more machine-like. But I think that they don't want us. I think that they don't want it to be a simple character. I don't think that viewing Cameron as just a machine is ever what Friedman and his team want us to be thinking and feeling about her throughout the series. And so adding the ballet plot line, the ballet imagery and action, I think is pretty explicitly attempting to give her human complexity.
Maybe. I mean, we're presented, or at least let me say it this way. Dimitri's sister, the ballet teacher, is presented with a kind of Turing test in her scenes with Cameron, in which Cameron states plain facts which we know to be describing a very different situation from what Dimitri's sister is probably imagining. She describes John as her brother, even though John is not her brother. It is true that her brother plays chess. But her relationship with John is obviously quite different from the ballet teacher's relationship with Dimitri. She robotically imitates another dancer in the classroom in order to gain favor with the ballet teacher, which the ballet teacher interprets as her being possessed of great untrained talent. And then she exhibits the surprising ability to be able to speak Russian, even though she is not Russian. And then knocks the guy across the room, at which point the ballet teacher says, "How can you do such things? You are just a woman like me."
But we know better.
So, do you think the fact that the ballet teacher is being presented with a kind of Turing test maybe is a hint to us as an audience that we should not take all of Cameron's actions at face value either?
I just think that we're meant to kind of marinate in the uncertainty of where Cameron is. And my interpretation of where she goes from here leans heavily on that uncertainty.
I see. All right. Well, so let's just say I think what the thing we can agree on is that for sure the episode and Sarah's closing monologue is asking us to understand that the compassion Sarah shows for Ellison in rescuing him from the fire marks her off as human, and Cameron's perhaps unwitting remorselessness marks her off as being non-human.
Yep.
Do you want to will you accept that is the ethical proposition that the show's ending is providing us with?
Absolutely. I think that is taking advantage of where Terminator comes from to be able to have a more brutal character who still remains one of our protagonists rather than antagonists.
And that's somewhat mirrored in John having to initially having a distorted view of his mother as someone who deliberately gave him up because she stopped fighting while she was in the mental hospital. And Sarah reveals to John that she is in fact not that person, that she's not a was not pitiless towards him as a child while she was in the institution, but in fact was intending to break out to rescue him in the same way that she rescues Ellison in this episode.
Well, I do not personally think less of Sarah for having a day of weakness where she was so beaten down that she considered that John would be better off if he weren't tied to her. And I think that she overcomes that weakness and concocts her scheme to steal a paperclip and get out. So I think it's more of an arc than the whole thing's a plan. You see what I'm saying?
I do. What I'm saying is that it's clear that at least part of what's going on in Sarah's mind when she decides to rescue Ellison is he calls out for help. And because they have a shared humanity, she cannot ignore his call. Whereas the ballet teacher and Dimitri call out for Cameron's help, but she ignores them because she is not human and does not share a common humanity with them. And in the same way, what makes Sarah want to break out of the mental institution to rescue John is their kinship, the fact that he is her son, that they have not just a shared humanity, but a shared family bond.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the end result of all three of those decisions do map on each other. I just think that I would describe what Sarah's going through in this retcon, which some people are very upset about. But I think that this retcon to Sarah's interview just before the day we see at the beginning of Terminator 2 um, makes sense. I think it is. I think it makes sense. It's not a retcon that makes me dislike Sarah or be upset that it changes um, the meaning of their relationship or anything.
Why do you think that Sarah goes to visit Andrew Good's grave at the beginning of the episode?
I think Sarah feels the weight of all the people who die in her war against Skynet. We know that she feels the weight of Miles Dyson's death from Terminator 2. We know she mourns Kyle Reese's death. So I think that it's perfectly in character for her to mourn Andy's death. I don't know if I would say I ever thought that Sarah genuinely had romantic interest in Andy. I wouldn't be surprised if, Lena Headey or the writers or Josh Friedman said, yeah, that was our intention. But it wasn't like a really serious one. She was mostly going on a date with him for information to find out about the Turk. But I think she did like him as a person, as a man. And so she mourns the death of that man, even if it's not a great romance uh, or anything like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, to go with the theme that I stated in the monologue, a grave site is a memento. It's our marker of the past that we leave behind us. That's meant to elicit others' memories of us.
And it's explicitly in contrast to what they do with Terminator Remains, which is burn them completely to ash.
So that they can never be remembered.
Exactly.
And then, yeah, there's a callback to it at the end of the episode where Derek and Sarah have a conversation. Derek possibly has not seen grass or a blue sky since he was a young boy. And so he takes a walk on the Connors' grassy lawn in bare feet. He asks Sarah where Kyle is buried, and she says, underneath the grass. I'll show you sometime.
Oh man, that is deep foreshadowing. Deep foreshadowing. What do you think about the visual choices, the lighting, and the framing in this episode from director?
I think I really enjoyed the opening sequence with Cameron. It effectively evokes the iconography, not only the iconography, but sort of the mood of the first two films. I thought it was interesting the way they played with cutting from video recordings of Silverman's interviews with Sarah to cutting to scenes of Silverman, flashback scenes of Silverman and Sarah. Again, visually cueing us into the theme of memory and records in this episode, and the fact that even a video recording or a document does not capture the whole truth of a past event.
Yeah,
by giving us the same scene that we've just seen on a video recording from a different camera angle as a flashback. So I noticed that. What were some of the directorial choices that you enjoyed or found meaningful?
Well, in addition to the brilliance of the opening recreation of the T-1000 scenes with Cameron in that place, I think that there's a lot of really excellent use of high contrast lighting that create good profile and silhouette shots, as well as really highlighting some of the actors' faces in some of the shots, so that you have intense light and intense shadow that really heightens the emotions and adds a lot of visual interest, especially in things like the ballet studio, and then of course the final scene where Cameron does her ballet recital while Derek is watching, the play of shadow on the wall and over Derek himself as he's watching. So you get both the movement of Cameron and also Derek's reaction. Is just very cleverly blocked and framed and lit in a way that I think is just feels more artistic, more filmic, as we could say, more cinematic than televisual, indicating that the lighting team and the director were operating on a really high level to be able to do that on a regular 1 to 2 week shoot for a typical TV show.
It is interesting. I mean, there really isn't an action sequence or a fight scene in this episode the way that we've seen in previous episodes.
I mean, Sarah rescuing Ellison from the fire is sort of an action scene.
It is sort of. Cameron smashing the Los Angeles power grid is also a bit of action, I suppose. But it's not the emphasis of the episode.
No, it's much more contemplative episode, and maybe that's why I like it. I like a contemplative episode.
Well, anything else you would like to add about this episode, The Demon Hand? Which I did not look up why it's called that. Did you look up why it's called that?
No, it reminds me of those silly evil hand stories where it's either a hand in a box or someone gets a hand transplant and the hand is evil.
Yeah, let's talk about that briefly, because I did think of that also.
Okay.
Those stories are premised on the idea that sometimes artifacts can take on a life of their own. Do you think that's partially what was being evoked?
Well, I feel like other episodes, particularly when Cromartie is recreating himself, are more playing with that idea than this episode. I think this episode, you could think of the demon hand as maybe the demon hand of fate, or the demon hand of the Terminator as viewed through Silverman's insane cult. Because the hand itself, the physical artifact of the T888's hand, is not actually seen that much. It's just not highlighted in very many shots. One sort of random question. We find out from the ballerina's brother, that the Turk was deliberately told to lose. It was misprogrammed. Um, do you think that that is meant to be a branching timeline, a human choice that changes the Turk from being the original source of Skynet to something else?
Well, I mean, in some sense, we're already in an alternate timeline from the one presented to us in the previous episode, because in the previous episode, Andy Good claims to have invented the Turk, and confesses that to Derek while they're being held in the Skynet prison camp. And going forward from the episode before, from episode 4, we no longer exist in a timeline where that is possible. Because not only has the Turk been changed or destroyed, but Andy Good has been killed.
Right. So, but the cheating, the misprogramming happened before Andy was killed.
It's an interesting question, which, to be honest, my recollection of the rest of the series is not. Ironically, my recollection is incomplete.
For an episode without memory,
I don't remember whether they leave it open, whether it is possible that the version of the Turk that survives in this timeline could be a progenitor of Skynet.
Well, there's a lot of stuff that I think was never fully fleshed out. A lot of stuff that happens and is implied in season 2 that I think was meant to be answered and elucidated in season 3. And the notes we have, well, I think they do provide a good way forward towards the ending of the show. They're kind of radically different from what actually happens. So I'm not 100% sure what I think about. Do I think that the Turk was meant to become Skynet at this point? I think in Friedman's mind, probably. But where Friedman took it in season 2, not really.
I think the only answer we're given to that question is the dialogue that Sarah and Andy Good has before he's murdered, in which he says the first version of the Turk, which Sarah destroyed, was mercurial and angry in its personality, whereas the reprogrammed Turk that Andy makes after the fire at his home appears to be more benevolent and curious about the world around it.
Yeah, so I think that the idea there is that the first Turk, the one that Sarah destroyed, would have been the foundation of the Skynet that launches Judgment Day. But the new Turk might not.
Or at least the new Turk presents a very different version of Judgment Day. Yeah, I don't. We will continue exploring that question as the series, as our reviews of the series progress.
Correct.
Because season 2, we're almost done with season 1. Season 2 opens up a whole new can of worms for that question.
So many worms, shiny silver squiggling worms.
So many shiny squiggly worms. Yes. All right, Ian. This was a good episode, but I think we have exhausted everything that we wanted to say about it.
I think we've dug into it nicely. I think I like the discussion we had. I think that we talked about stuff that are why the episode sticks with me. You do have a note about Ukraine drone warfare. Do you want to talk about that?
No.
Okay.
I just was amused by the idea that not amused is not even the right word. Intrigued, maybe. Intrigued by the idea that Ukraine is building infantry drones. At the same time as the United States Senate is debating on whether women should be in combat, and the Supreme Court is debating on whether if you have an computer application without its programming algorithm, is it still the same computer application? We live in the world that Skynet has created.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you for having this discussion. Thank you for listening, audience. And until next time, we'll be back.
We'll be back.